Joined right here in our New York studios by two members of the Zimmerman defense team, attorneys Mark O'Mara and Don West. Welcome to the program. Thank you very much. Congratulations to both of you.
Thank you very much.
All right, any knock-knock jokes?
Not tonight.
All right, I'm just kidding. I know you probably got a lot. Are you surprised how big this all got?
I am. Actually, I thought it was big to begin with, and I thought it was going to slow down, particularly when the evidence started coming out, because you first and then me second said, look, guys, let's just wait. Sit back. You don't know the evidence yet because I don't know it yet. Let's wait until we have all the evidence. And I thought that would sort of tend to swell the tide or bring it back. But it never did. And part of that was because of the way the prosecutors were hiding some of the evidence and the discovery, and it just kept it at this fever pitch way too long.
Yeah, I agree. We're going to get to that in a minute. Don, what do you think won this case for you?
The evidence.
Well, what are the big factors, in other words? Just the, like, for example, I think three things really came into play for me. The justification, the law, the eyewitness, and I would say, even though they weren't necessary, the injuries.
You mean what was the most important evidence in the case? The eyewitness, of course, whose testimony completely corroborated what George Zimmerman said, and also matched the ballistics, matched the medical examiner's testimony, not Dr. Bowles, but rather Dr. Vincent DeMaio.
Right.
It all matched up.
Right. One of the things, you, in closing arguments, I thought you did a really good job of pointing out to the jury, this is not the same as everyday life. For those that maybe didn't hear it, explain that.
The frustration that I have with juries is they default to what we all do. We all default to this, make a decision every moment of every day because you have to. And that's sort of a very quick decision-making process. The criminal standard is so much higher than that. The beyond a reasonable doubt standard we never use in our daily life. Even getting married or moving or getting a new job is always compromising back and forth. The decision to convict somebody has got to be one which is beyond what we're ever used to. And my fear, as I said to the jury, is that they will start defaulting back to their normal decision-making processes that hurts a criminal defendant.
Let me go to the justification of the use of force. These were the jury instructions, because I think this was very key in making their decision. And it says, an issue in this case is whether or not George Zimmerman, in fact, acted in self-defense. It is a defense to a crime of second-degree murder or the lesser-included offense of manslaughter if the death of Trayvon Martin resulted from the justifiable use of deadly force. Deadly force means force likely to cause death or great bodily harm. A person is justified in using deadly force if he reasonably believes that such force is necessary to prevent imminent death or great bodily harm. If George Zimmerman was not engaged in an unlawful activity and was attacked in any place where he had a right to be, he had no duty to retreat, had the right to stand his ground, meet force with force, including deadly force, if he reasonably believed that it was necessary to do so to prevent death or great bodily harm to himself or another, or to prevent the commission of a forcible felony. Explain that to our audience, because that's the law.
Here are the most critical words. If you reasonably believe that you're about to suffer great bodily injury, you can react with deadly force. We all have that right. Stand your ground laws doesn't matter. Every self-defense case allows you to react to great bodily injury with deadly force. To explain what George did was George suffered 45 seconds of being attacked because we know it was him screaming. Everyone knows it was his screaming now. And he was getting battered because we see the injuries. And he reacted to those injuries at a point when he had to, just like Dennis Root said, he had no other alternatives. He had already tried to scream to stop it, and he'd already asked for help from the witness, and it didn't help. He had no other choice.
Let's go over the irregularities in the case. Don, for example, the withholding of evidence, which your partner mentioned. Explain that.
You know, a moment ago I said, what's the most important thing? Evidence, as opposed to an appeal to emotion. Let's look at the real evidence, and it was like pulling teeth to get the real evidence, the exculpatory evidence, this information that is the foundation of the way the criminal justice system is supposed to work, says that the defense is entitled to all exculpatory evidence. And we fought month after month after month just to get what should have been given without the hundreds of hours that it took. So that's the way this started, and unfortunately it continued until the very day the trial started.
What did you think of Angela Corey firing the IT person that exposed this?
I think that's certainly the way she handles her business. I think that's shown in the way she handled the trial, in the ways I guess she trains prosecutors to fail to give over discovery like Don talked about. So I think, that's just in her stripes. But I think it's despicable when somebody comes to the forefront and exposes an unethical behavior that they then get fired even though they have a 4-month-old child.
Special prosecutor, no grand jury, irregular?
Very well. They don't have to impanel a grand jury. But in a case like this, with the type of focus this had, and realizing that you already had a grand jury in place, why not use 18 people from the community to make a decision that they're supposed to be empowered with? Why should you come in from an out-of-area county and come down here and make a decision after praying with the family and not let 18 citizens from Seminole County make the decision they were ready to make?
What about evidence that you wanted to use but were not allowed to use? What is that evidence?
Well, we looked at this case and how aggressive we would get with our defense based upon how the prosecution was handling their case. And what we wanted to do would be the ones who were making the decision. That's why we fought so hard to get in the toxicology results, because we should have had that. Then we make a decision, tactical decision, whether or not it comes in. We decided not to because it wasn't that significant. We definitely should have had that same right to look at Trayvon Martin's cell phone and say, this is a guy who knows how to fight because he talked about getting mounted and how that was a position where he couldn't do anything, and that if you punch somebody in the nose, you can win a fight. The judge should definitely have let us use that information.
That seemed crucial to me.
Well, it was. It turns out we didn't need it, but I think that should have been our decision.
Yeah, I would agree with you. Any other evidence, Don, that you would have liked to have brought in?
I think that's the most powerful evidence that was kept out. And that in and of itself, I think, would have helped equalize this notion in the jury instructions, the physical abilities and capabilities of the individuals involved. The state took great pains to offer evidence of George Zimmerman's supposed MMA training. We offered the gym teacher, if you will. I think we had the same right to show Trayvon Martin's knowledge and experience in physical contact.
What about when they go for second degree? They start losing the case. Every commentator is even recognizing they're losing the case. Now we'll lower it to manslaughter or maybe third-degree murder, child abuse as the foundation. Is that good for our system of justice?
Well, manslaughter is an alternative that should have been given, because that's just what we call a necessary lesser included. I did not like their behavior to wait until literally the 11th hour and the 59th minute to try and sneak in a third-degree murder by child abuse, which they planned for months, because you don't walk into a courtroom with 15 cases cited and ready to go 7:20 the day that you're given jury instructions unless you planned it.
How hard was it waiting for the jury to come back? They were gone almost 16 hours. How hard is that?
It's the worst time of my life. I liken it to this for those people who don't do trial work. It's like waiting outside a surgery room while you have a family member in surgery. You can't do anything. You're helpless. You just have to wait. Every time the door knocks or something happens, you jump, but you just have to sit, wait patiently.
All right, I want to talk to you 16 hours?
Yeah. That's all.
Oh, my goodness. I thought it was 16 days.
Sure. All right, when we come back, I want to ask you about the president's comments on this case. I want to ask you about the potential for a civil rights case by the Justice Department. We'll come back. We'll have more with the Zimmerman defense team when we return. Now, moments after the not guilty verdict was handed down, the Zimmerman defense team had very strong words for the mainstream media. Watch.
Two systems went against George Zimmerman that he can't understand. You guys, the media, he was like a patient in an operating table where mad scientists were committing experiments on him and he had no anesthesia. He didn't know why he was turned into this monster, but quite honestly, you guys had a lot to do with it. You just did, because you took a story that was fed to you and you ran with it, and you ran right over him. And that was horrid to him.
And still in the studio, we continue with Zimmerman defense attorneys Mark O'Mara and Don West. I was glad you did that, because they were guilty of this.
They truly were. I mean, you look at this in the beginning, what happened was they didn't know any better, because they were given a well-crafted story fed to them with a picture of a 12-year-old child and a 275-pound George Zimmerman, and they gave a great narrative that that person had to kill this young black child of 12 years of age. It was just fantasy. It was just completely made up. And unfortunately, the media just ran with it because it was so compelling a story. I'm hoping that the media has now learned. It will never happen again that you look at a story fed to you and not do what journalists were taught to do 50 years ago, look at your sources and vet it out.
Richard Jewell, he fit the profile of the lone bomber. After all, he lived with his mother. That was one case. The Duke LaCrosse case was another recent example.
Sure.
All right, let's talk about the President of the United States. If I had a son, he would look like Trayvon. His only reaction to the verdict is, well, let's talk about gun control.
Well, the first comment, I really think that he also bought hook, line, and sinker, although he's got the best research team in the universe. He bought that hook, line, and sinker because if he had actually vetted it out, if he had looked at the real pictures of George Zimmerman and the real pictures of Trayvon Martin before he made that comment, I don't think he ever would have made the comment. Having done that and having sort of now used the power of his office for that purpose, he really had an opportunity when the verdict came down to rebalance things, to say, look, a jury heard this case, they decided the case, and he is an innocent man who used self-defense. Let's take this lesson and move forward positively. Instead, he sort of suggests again, gun control needs to be revisited. George Zimmerman used that gun properly after waiting 45 seconds. Why not acknowledge that?
Yeah, what was your reaction, Don?
George Zimmerman acted in lawful self-defense. He did what he had the absolute right to do to save his own life, and he did. Mm-hmm. This wasn't a hate crime. If it had been a hate crime, he would have been prosecuted for a hate crime by the state prosecutor. That exists under Florida law. To suggest even now, after the verdict speaks so loudly, that this is still an issue is very troubling. I agree with Mark. The opportunity was there to speak strongly about what this jury's verdict really says.
What do you think about Eric Holder and the news of the day that they're considering reopening what had been opened before, civil rights charges against George?
This started a year ago when they brought down the FBI and did a full investigation of whether or not George Zimmerman violated Trayvon Martin's civil rights. They talked to about 40 witnesses. We have all of it. It's all in discovery. And every one of those witnesses said George is a meek, mild guy without a racist bone in his body. And we already have that information. I think the suggestion that they're going to look at it is just placating those people who they want to placate to believe that there's still some investigation going on.
Didn't George Zimmerman date a black woman at the prom, take one to the prom, and didn't he mentor black children on weekends? At
the time this happened, he was mentoring 2 young black children. Even though the mentoring program had been disbanded, he kept it up. He had black children living with him in his home from the time he was 6 to the time he was 12. He did bring a black girl from Barbados, I think, to the prom. And he was a guy who went after Sanford PD when they didn't do enough when this Sherman Ware black homeless guy was beat up by the white cop.
No. A lot of people in the country tried to make this all about race and black versus white. Isn't George Hispanic?
No. He's white Hispanic.
White Hispanic,
yes, he used to be Hispanic.
Or self-alleged Hispanic, I read, I think, in the AP. Self-proclaimed, I think it was.
Hispanic, but the story was written before they realized he was Hispanic. So they instead of changing the story to acknowledge their fault, they made up a new word called white Hispanic.
What are the unanswered questions both of you have after this case? Is there anything you want to know about this case? I have one question. I'm just asking maybe what you have.
Yeah, I do. I mean, I have my suspicions. I would love to have a crystal ball to know precisely what the impetus for this prosecution was. I know what I think it was. I would like to see some letter, some email that documents my suspicions, because I have no idea why they took an absolutely obvious self-defense case and turns it into a case that, though they thought it would do some good in a strange way, ended up dividing the country. It's going to take us years to get past the Zimmerman verdict when it was a just verdict, and we can't have the opportunity for the conversations we should have about other things wrong with the justice system.
Don, is there one I would like to know myself? Why did Trayvon feel the need to punch George and then get on top of him? I don't know. Why did that happen? I don't know.
We know that he had plenty of time to think about it. I think the evidence proved conclusively that there were about 4 minutes in between the time that it was clear from the testimony that Trayvon Martin ran and essentially lost George Zimmerman. And then 4 minutes later, the confrontation took place. What went through Trayvon Martin's mind, we don't know, except he made a conscious decision to engage. He had to go somewhere and come back, or simply wait around for George Zimmerman to get off the phone and, in many respects, be vulnerable himself.
Yeah. What do you make of the NAACP comments that have been made and the violence in Oakland, L.A., and other cities. What do you make of that?
I'm troubled by it for a couple of reasons. One, it's dividing the country. And two, it's evidencing a failure to trust a system that we have to trust. We have to believe in our criminal justice system so that people will still use it and people will trust in it. And if they don't, then we get back into the type of justice in the streets that we shouldn't do. And I'm very worried about that.
What did you think of the comment? You kind of dismissed it in closing, creepy-ass cracker. What did that tell you, though, in your mind?
You know, I will dismiss it again. I think that's a 17-year-old talking, and I'm okay with that. I said words when I was 17 I probably shouldn't have said. I don't know that that meant that there was a racial overtone to that. Could it be argued? Yes. But I think that Trayvon Martin didn't know what was going on. I don't think George Zimmerman fully knew what Trayvon was doing, and I don't think Trayvon Martin fully knew what George was doing. But the one who reacted most improperly with violence seemingly was Trayvon Martin.
Yeah. What did you think of Rachel Jeantel, who was their star witness? Any thoughts? Either one?
I think that she was in a position where she didn't want to be involved in this case at all. If I had a crystal ball, I think her mom and Mrs. Fulton had a conversation where her mom said words like, "You go tell that mom what happened to her son now." Sort of brought her into it. She modified and sort of glossed over her testimony in order to make it more palatable to the mom. Then she did it, of course, in the initial interview, the absurd interview with Mr. Crump.
That was crazy.
Well, worse than that, because you can almost say Mr. Crump didn't know what else to do, but then it happens again with Mr. Delarianda, who allows an interview to take place on the couch with the crying mom of the decedent right next to the witness.
Didn't you think it was helpful? A lot of people commented on both the walkthrough that George did with the police and then the interview that he did with me, and that the prosecution brought George's story in his own voice in twice in full. Helpful to your defense? Net plus? Any negative to that?
Video is pretty powerful, isn't it? George Zimmerman told his story for the world to see and told it to you, too.
Yeah.
Powerful stuff.
And then people, the prosecutors in the end said it was cowardly for George Zimmerman not to take the stand. And I'm like, he told his story twice. You introduced it as evidence.
How dare they denigrate the jury verdict in this case by suggesting anything other than it was a just verdict?
Did the comment in my interview about God's will, now as a religious person, I know that everybody kind of, as a Christian, believes that's God's will. That's a state of mind. Did that worry you? Because they kept harping on it.
I've said it several times when I've lost my mom, my dad, and my sister. You have to, when you don't understand why something happened, when you can't fathom why something happened, and you're Christian or Catholic or religious, you say it's God's plan, which means I think, I don't know why it happened, but I'm willing to accept it. It came across somewhat insensitive with the people who want to suggest it was insensitive, but that's not the way George meant it.
All right, last question, and I have to ask you.
No.
I have to. It's my job. Do you regret the knock-knock joke that got so much attention?
Yes.
So you want him to say yes?
I regret having not told it better. I do.
You regret he sold it?
No. Well,
yes, he does. He's shaking his head. Yes.
May I say what the objective was?
No.
Yeah. No.
Yes.
The objective was, if you heard what the prosecutor said and the way he said it, the passion, the glaring, the staring, the condemnation, a raw appeal to emotion, I knew I couldn't follow that act. Okay. There had to be a disconnect so that the jury would think of something else other than what he had just said, which I knew they couldn't prove.
All right, I'll let you two fight it out after dinner. Hey, thank you both for stopping by. And congratulations on a very hard-fought case and very difficult circumstances. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Great to see you.